A girl was chained to a post in the snow until a rancher untied her and said, "Come home." Snow had no mercy. It swallowed the earth in white silence, smothering sound, burying hope. Lydia's wrists burned where the iron chain cut into her skin, binding her to the weather-cracked post. Her thin dress was already stiff with frost, her breath a trembling plume that faded as soon as it rose. She had screamed until her throat went raw, until no one answered but the wind. Now she could only whisper prayers into the night. The men who had dragged her here, faces hard with whiskey and greed, were gone, their horses' hoofprints fading beneath the storm. They had laughed when they left her, said she wasn't worth the feed for a mule, that she'd best let the coyotes gnaw her bones clean. She thought of her little sister, Rosie, left in town with neighbors who owed her nothing. Who would make sure the girl ate? Who would braid her hair in the morning? Lydia's heart cracked under the thought. The snow rose higher against her boots, soaking through the leather until her toes were numb stones. She tried to sing one of Mama's hymns, but her lips were too cold to form the words. Stars blurred above her, sharp needles of light piercing a black sky. She wondered if Mama could see her from heaven, if Papa's spirit, lost on some trail, years ago, might guide her out of this. Her knees buckled. She sagged against the post, iron rattling. "Please, Lord," she whispered, "don't let me die here. Not like this." A crunch of hooves cut through the storm. At first, she thought she was hearing death itself, the pale rider folks whispered about, the one who came for souls on lonely nights. But the shape that broke through the haze was no ghost. It was a man, tall in the saddle, shoulders broad, beneath a snow-dusted coat, his horse steaming with breath. He reined in, staring at her like he'd found a vision. His eyes, gray as the storm, narrowed with something between fury and sorrow. He swung down, boots sinking deep into the drifts. "God Almighty," he muttered, kneeling at her side. His gloved hands fumbled at the iron links. She flinched, expecting another blow, but his touch was steady, patient. "Who did this to you?" Her voice cracked. "Men! From town! Said I owed them. Please, I can't—" "Save your strength." He pulled a knife from his belt, striking at the chain. Sparks spat into the snow, once, twice, until the metal gave. Her hands fell free, raw wrists trembling in his. He caught her before she collapsed. "Name's Daniel McGraw," he said, voice low, rough as gravel yet strangely gentle. He lifted her as though she weighed nothing at all. "You're coming home." Her tears froze on her cheeks, but inside, her chest, something warm flickered to life. Not yet hope, but the memory of it. The rhythm of the horse's hooves was the only sound Lydia could hear above the storm. She was wrapped in the rancher's heavy coat, pressed against his chest, the thud of his heart steady beneath her ear. Every jolt of the saddle reminded her she was alive, though her body felt made of ice and fear. Daniel McGraw didn't speak much as he rode, but when he did, his voice rumbled low, meant to reassure. "Hold on, just a little further. My place ain't much, but it's warm." Warm. She clung to that word like it was salvation itself. When the cabin finally loomed through the storm, small, timbered, smoke curling faint from the chimney, Lydia's breath caught. It wasn't grand, but it was shelter, and right now it looked like heaven. Daniel dismounted and carried her through the door, pushing it shut against the wind. Heat from the fire washed over her, filling her nose with the scent of pine logs, and something faintly sweet, like coffee grounds left from morning. He set her gently in a chair by the hearth, tugging off her wet boots and wrapping a quilt around her shoulders. His movements were careful, respectful. He never lingered with his touch, never forced her gaze. Still, she felt the weight of his presence like a shield between her and the world that had abandoned her. "You got kin?" he asked quietly, crouching to stoke the fire. His gray eyes flicked to hers. Lydia's throat tightened. "A sister. Rosie. She's just 12. I left her with Mrs. Callahan in town, but—" Her voice broke. "Those men, what if they come for her too?" Daniel's jaw flexed. "They won't. Not while I've breath in me." She studied him in the firelight. His face was weathered, lined by years of work and loss, yet there was something unbroken in him. A strength that didn't boast, only endured. She wanted to believe him, but doubt clung like frost. "You don't even know me," she whispered. "I don't have to. No one deserves what they did." His voice hardened. "I buried a wife because men thought they had the right to take what wasn't theirs. I won't see it happen again." The words struck deep, full of pain she hadn't expected. She opened her mouth, then shut it, unsure what to say. He handed her a tin cup of hot broth, steam curling into her face. She sipped, warmth spreading, through her chest like light breaking into darkness. For the first time since the chain snapped, she let her shoulders sag. Not safe yet. She knew the world too well for that, but safer than she'd felt in years. She met his eyes, and in them found not pity, but promise. Outside, the storm howled. Inside, the fire crackled. And for the first fragile moment, Lydia began to believe that maybe she wasn't meant to be lost after all. The storm passed overnight, leaving the world white and brittle with silence. Lydia woke in the rancher's cabin, the quilt tucked snug around her. The fire burned down to embers. For a moment, she thought she'd dreamed it all. The chains, the rescue, the man with storm-gray eyes. But when she turned her head, she saw him by the window, shoulders broad beneath his worn shirt, hat in his lap. He was watching the sunrise over the snow, face unreadable. She sat up, her body aching but alive. "You didn't sleep," she murmured. Daniel shook his head. "Been a long time since I trusted sleep." His voice carried weight, like the words were stones pulled from a riverbed. Lydia pulled the quilt tighter. The cabin was simple. A table with 2 chairs, a shelf with jars of beans and flour, a rifle resting above the door. There were no frills, no clutter, just a man's life carved out of the wilderness. Yet in one corner she noticed something unexpected, a small wooden rocking chair, the kind meant for a child. Dust lay over it like time forgotten. Her heart tugged. "Was it yours?" she asked softly. Daniel's jaw tightened. He rose, set his hat back on, and busied himself with the stove. "Belonged to my little girl. She didn't make it past her second winter." Lydia's breath caught. She hadn't expected him to share that piece of himself, but it explained the heaviness in his eyes. Pain recognized pain, and something in her reached toward him, not out of pity, but kinship. She moved carefully to the table, her legs still weak, and began sorting through his shelves. "You've been keeping beans and flour too long. The weevils will take it." He turned, brow raised. "You know about stores?" She gave a faint smile, though it trembled. "Mama taught me. Said food's the heart of a home, and if you don't tend it, the whole house starves." Her fingers brushed the sack of flour, and memories flooded. Rosie at the table, hands sticky with dough, Mama humming as she kneaded bread. Lydia swallowed hard. "I just need to do something with my hands, else the fear'll eat me whole." Daniel studied her for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. "All right. Kitchen's yours. Do what you need." So she worked, mixing, kneading, coaxing life from what little supplies he had. Daniel chopped wood outside, the thunk of the axe steady, grounding. As the bread baked, the cabin filled with a smell that wrapped around her heart like an embrace she hadn't known she needed. When he came back in, sweat on his brow, she set a small loaf before him. He didn't speak at first, just broke it. In half, steam rising into the cold air. Then his rough voice softened. Been a long time since this house smelled like home. Lydia lowered her eyes, a flush warming her cheeks. In that moment, she realized she wasn't just a burden taken in. She was shaping something here, something fragile but real. Yet shadows still lingered, her sister waiting, the men who had chained her, the fear that the past wasn't done with either of them. And deep inside, she knew storms didn't always stay outside the cabin walls. It began with the sound of hooves. Lydia froze, hands still dusted with flour from the morning's baking. Daniel was already at the window, his body taut, every line of him sharpened into readiness. "They found us," he muttered. Through the glass, Lydia saw them, 3 men on horseback, faces she remembered too well. The same sneers, the same cold eyes that had left her chained like an animal. Her stomach turned to stone. Daniel grabbed the rifle from above the door. "Stay low," but Lydia's voice cracked through the fear. "They'll go after Rosie." "They won't touch her," Daniel growled, chambering around with the sound of finality. "Not while I'm here." The riders reined up before the cabin. One, taller than the rest, dismounted with a swagger. "McGraw!" he bellowed. "You got something that belongs to us. Hand her over, and maybe we'll let you keep your land." Daniel opened the door and stepped onto the porch, rifle leveled steady. "You left her to die. That makes her no man's property but God's, and she chose to walk into my home." Lydia's heart pounded as the wind snatched his words and flung them across the snow. She wanted to scream, to beg him back inside, but something inside her stiffened. She was tired of chains, tired of being voiceless. She rose and stepped out behind him, quilt wrapped around her shoulders like armor. "You'll never touch me again," she called, voice shaking but clear. The men laughed, cruel and sharp. "Girl, you don't get to decide." Daniel's finger tensed on the trigger, but Lydia laid a hand on his arm. "No, let me." Her eyes burned with something fierce. The leader spat into the snow. "Fine then. Speak your piece." Her voice rose louder than she thought possible. "You think I'm weak because I'm small, because I'm a woman. But I lived through your chains. I lived through the storm, and now I've got something you'll never have. Someone who stands with me, not over me." She lifted her chin toward Daniel, and the words rang like iron. "You can't break me again." The men shifted, uneasy. They hadn't expected. Defiance hadn't expected her to speak like fire. The leader sneered, but his hand twitched near his gun. That was all Daniel needed. The crack of the rifle split the morning, kicking snow from the ground inches from the man's boots. "Next. One won't miss," he said flatly. The standoff stretched, breathless and raw. Finally, the men cursed, spat, and wheeled their horses. The storm of hooves faded into the hills, leaving silence heavy in their wake. Lydia's knees gave way, but Daniel caught her, steady as the earth. "You were braver than I ever was," he said hoarsely. She looked up at him, tears stinging. Her eyes. "No. You gave me the ground to stand on." In that moment, the snow seemed less cold, the world less cruel. Together they had faced it, and together they had won. The snow melted slow that spring, dripping from the eaves of Daniel's cabin, soaking the earth until the ground breathed green again. Lydia stood by the door, apron dusted with flour, watching Rosie chase a stray chicken across the yard, her laughter bright as morning. Daniel leaned on the porch rail, hat pushed back, eyes soft as they followed the girl's darting steps. It had taken weeks of quiet courage to bring Rosie out from town, weeks where Lydia carried fear like a second shadow. But Daniel had ridden beside her, silent as stone, and when those same men tried to block their way, he faced them down with a stare that promised death. They hadn't tried again. Now, in the safety of the ranch, Rosie thrived. Her cheeks were round with good meals, her hair glistened in the sun, and she had learned to fetch water, gather eggs, and, most proudly, knead bread beside her sister. Lydia watched her grow into the childhood Lydia herself had lost too soon. Still, shadows lingered. Nights came when Lydia would wake screaming, feeling iron on her wrists again. On those nights, Daniel sat near, not touching, only waiting until her breathing steadied. Sometimes he spoke of his wife, of the daughter he'd buried, of how guilt gnawed him that he hadn't saved them. She listened, not with pity, but with the same quiet strength he gave her. They were both learning how to be whole. One afternoon, Lydia planted a small garden near the cabin. Rosie pressed seeds into the soil, giggling as dirt smeared her hands. Daniel brought her a bucket of water and stood watching as Lydia bent, low, fingers coaxing life into rows. "This ground's been fallow near 10 years, he said softly. "Didn't think anything'd grow here again." Lydia glanced up, sun lighting her face. "Sometimes the land just needs someone to believe in it." His gaze held hers, steady, reverent. Same could be said for people. Her heart swelled. Fragile yet fierce. She set her hand over his rough one, soil staining both their skin. Neither spoke the word love. It was too sacred, too deep, but it hummed between them, sure as roots beneath the earth. By summer, the cabin smelled of bread and stew, laughter ringing off the walls. Rosie drew crude pictures of a house with 3 figures inside, and Lydia pinned them on the shelf with pride. Daniel carved a new rocking chair, not to mourn the past, but to honor the future. The world outside was still harsh. Men with cruelty still roamed. But within these walls, Lydia had found something she thought forever lost: belonging, dignity, a home built not on chains, but on care. One evening, as the sun sank gold across the prairie, Lydia stood on the porch with Rosie in her arms and Daniel at her side. The fields glowed, the chickens clucked, and the smell of fresh bread carried on the wind. She breathed deep, the air alive with promise. "If I ever forget this moment," she whispered, "remind me." Daniel tipped his hat, eyes shining. "Darling, this is yours. No one can take it." And Lydia knew he was right. If Lydia's courage and heart touch something quiet and true inside your soul, make sure to like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Out here in the Wild West, love may be hard won, but it's always worth the fight. Join us for more stories of grit, sacrifice, and hearts that endure against all odds.